words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable unto you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. To err is human, to forgive divine. It is this pithy, catchy little saying that we use quite a bit, to the point that it's really kind of become a cliche. But it's this great little encapsulation of our experience as people. Namely, that we screw up all the time. But that thanks be to God, through God, there's forgiveness for that. And it's a beautiful image, and it's an image that's at the heart of who and what we are as followers of Christ. But it's one that I think we misuse from time to time. I think sometimes there is the temptation to turn it into a kind of cheap grace that doesn't really mean much of anything. I think our temptation, unfortunately, is to imagine God as being sort of like that really spineless, benevolent parent who sort of keeps giving you money to bail you out when you keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Like, oh, well, you blew 10 grand this weekend out at the track and then going to the bar every night. All right, here's another 20,000. Don't blow it all in one place. Whether we like to do it or not, there's that temptation to treat God like that indulgent parent or like a vending machine, where we know we're always going to get that grace and forgiveness. So we just put our, confess whatever the sin of the day is, push E6, and grace rains down like a bag of Skittles. This sort of attitude is exactly what a theologian whose name was H. Richard Niebuhr was talking about when he gave this immortal line about how one of the perils with which we're faced in the church is proclaiming the good news of a kingdom, of a God without judgment, to a people without sin, through the ministrations of a Christ without a cross. Cheap grace. The kind of grace that pretends that Easter happened without Good Friday. The kind of wholeness that imagines that there was never any brokenness to start with. The kind of flimsy thing that doesn't really stand up to the pressures and the challenges of life in the world, and just sort of fades away like the morning mist when the times get tough and the road gets rough. Cheap grace. I like to think of it as kind of being a little bit like cheap perfume. It doesn't take a lot of that to fill up a place with the smell of it. And we use it to try to cover things up. Think about how many times you've seen the person stumbling back in a movie, stumbling back from the bar, and they don't want anybody to know that they've been drinking, so out comes the bottle of the 50-cent cologne that you can get in a gas station bathroom. Just throwing it all over themselves so that you can't actually smell the problem past all of the cheap perfume. But I think we find in those places of brokenness in our lives, in the relationships that are broken, not just with God, but with each other, we find that cheap grace just doesn't cut it. That it doesn't get to the heart of the issues that we struggle with. That it doesn't really touch the places in us that are in need of grace, that are in need of renewal. We talk a lot about forgiveness. And I'm going to say something now that is probably going to seem really controversial. But bear with me because I promise it's not heresy. But we focus on the theme of forgiveness so much, in this very narrow sense of, I've done something bad, Jesus forgive me. And ignore in the process the fact that maybe that's not actually at the heart of what Jesus is about for us. And that's not because forgiveness isn't a part of it, but it's because we define that forgiveness so narrowly, to where we miss that what Jesus is about is reconciliation. And those are two similar but different ideas. Forgiveness, in the way that we usually describe it, is this sort of one and done kind of deal. You know, you broke my china at the potluck. Well, I forgive you. You took out a loan, and you've been trying to pay on it, and you've tried, but there's no way you can pay it off. Well, okay, I'll forgive you your debt. Go and be free. Reconciliation is a little different, because reconciliation is all about relationship. It's all about not just being granted pardon and sent on your way, but it's about having things made right, about having things made whole, about restoration, relationship. Now, I think all of us who have been in a relationship of any kind, be it romantic, be it with family members, be it with friends, we've probably seen that relationships aren't easy. They take work. They take effort. They take patience and understanding and listening and making sacrifices. They're not cheap by any means, but they're full of love. And they're full of grace. And in the same way, Jesus doesn't just wave a wand over and say, okay, everything's forgiven, on your way now, my work is done. But instead, Jesus comes to us, just like how he does for Peter, and just like he does for Saul, whose name will be changed to Paul shortly after this in the story. And enters into relationship with them, right in those places of brokenness, to bring forgiveness and healing, and love, and transformation of their whole lives and beings. Think about where these guys were at the beginning of these stories today. Saul/Paul is on his way to go murder Christians. He is on his way to go persecute the followers of the very same Christ who appears to him on the road and says, what are you doing, buddy? Why do you persecute me? And in that moment, Saul's life starts to change. He's blinded to the old way in which he lived. And through the prayer, through the mercy, through the relationship, with those very people that he was on his way to go throw in jail and kill, Saul's life is transformed into one of faith and new life. And he becomes the man, the single person most responsible for the spread of the gospel out of the Middle East and across the known world. And Peter, this is a man whose last major appearance in the gospel was of denying Jesus, cowering in the shadows on Good Friday, saying, I don't know the man. And yet Jesus still comes to him, right into the midst of that hurt and brokenness, saying, do you love me? Because I love you. Do you love me? Because I'm coming to you, even though you disowned me, even though you betrayed me, even though you weren't willing to be there for me in my hour of greatest need. Peter, I love you. Do you love me? And Peter goes from being the kind of person who wouldn't even claim to know the guy over in the shadows to becoming this incredibly bold preacher and leader in the church who's thrown into jail multiple times in the book of Acts for proclaiming the gospel, and who eventually dies a martyr's death, being crucified upside down, because he said he was not worthy to be crucified in the same way in which his Lord was. Christ does the hard work. Christ is willing to take the risk of relationship with all of us to make us right, to make us whole. Relationship. Of course, with all of that, there's a call. Because Jesus doesn't usually give us good news without calling us to be changed by it and to live differently. After all, Paul goes out and becomes one of the most successful evangelists of all time. Peter goes out and becomes a preacher and leader of the church. Jesus sort of describes that with the image of, feed my sheep, tend the lambs, look after the flock, take care of people, make things right with them, and help them make things right with each other. Paul actually writes in his second letter to the church in Corinth, that what's been given to us by Jesus is the ministry of reconciliation, of proclaiming this good news that makes us right with each other and makes us right with God. So, today, where do you see the need for that reconciliation? What are the relationships in your own lives that are in need of healing? What are the places in you that are in need of that grace and that mercy of God? What do you see around us in our neighborhood, in our communities, in our world that are in need of that building of relationship to create peace, to foster healing, to give hope and light in places that are dark and hopeless? How do we feed the lambs, tend the sheep? How can we cast our nets over onto the other side of the boat and discover the abundance that God has there? So, that's our challenge. As we learn to keep on taking those next steps with Jesus, let's ask that. What is in need of reconciliation here, in my life, in our world? And more importantly, where do I find Jesus in the midst of that? Coming to me, coming to all of us, and say, do you love me? Because I love you.